Hey everybody, it's Tom, and I wanted to come to you this week, following up, talk about the next chapter in Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. That would be chapter 2. Previous two videos went over the introduction, in which he discusses how the imperative of radicality demands a fidelity to reality. A reality which includes our social nature, that is embracing of the human condition and of the world as related to that condition in a dynamic, mutually interactive fashion. To really sort of be able to abide in that space, it's necessary to eschew or reject the temptation to a sectarian framework where we have something like an ideology that we would impose upon reality, and in the imposition thereby establish the conditions which generate violence and which interfere with our ability to really fully be as people, as human beings, which then transposed into the second chapter, where he sort of establishes the groundwork that the task which he is taking up in this work, the pedagogy of the oppressed, and more generally, is the formulation of an approach to transform consciousness so that people can move beyond violent situations. Violent situations being those which are characterized by a relationship of dominance and submission, a relationship which is mutually dehumanizing. There are a few salient points advanced by Freire in his consideration of that mode of relationship. For instance, that within that space, it is really only the oppressed that have the capacity to emancipate both of the actors, because of the fashion in which the oppressor, his consciousness is colored in a fashion which almost blinds him to the fact that there's a problem. I say almost because at the end of the day, the cataracts which that kind of a relationship places over our consciousness still cannot altogether obviate the essence of our humanity, an essence which permits a kind of compassion which in theory allows, and in fact this actually occurs, it's not just a theoretical possibility, that the people who are born or who find themselves in situations where they are the oppressors can, through the activity of compassion, realize the problematic of the situation and enter into solidarity with the oppressed. Now that then entails a radical renunciation of the oppressive mentality, which necessitates a great deal of emotional discipline. And that's sort of an interesting tact, but in parallel or along with that, and likely of deeper concern, is the phenomenon which occurs where the oppressed internalize, as the language sometimes goes, the values of the oppressor, and sometimes holds up the notion of a human being as an oppressor as a kind of acme or aspiration. Not that it's necessarily framed explicitly in those terms, but psychologically, psychosocially, this can be the case. You might even sort of loosely put it as a Stockholm syndrome, right? Where the kidnapper comes to enter into a relationship of affection with the kidnapped because they are not accounting for their own potential as subjects, as full human beings. So that's the rough framework. We have to sort of move beyond that, which means, by the way, that we do not have the luxury of imposition. If one tries to impose on another the idea that they need to extricate themselves from an oppressed situation, you really are running the risk of simply reproducing the infelicitous power relation that we're trying to escape. Because imposition does not respect the subjectivity of the other, their capacity as free beings to enter into and to participate in reality. And that is really what is taken up in the second chapter of the Pedagogy of the Oppressed, where we ask the question, what is it to educate? And Freire, what is it, to either, and what Freire does is he sets up the notion that there's more or less two ways to go about the matter. The way which is assumed within a situation of oppression, where you have a dominating class, is what he calls the banking or depository model, in which the teacher and the student are in a relationship of subject to object, where the teacher, as the narrator, approaches the students as objects who will receive the contents of the teacher's speech or utterances and memorize and allow those issuances to be inscribed on their consciousness. They are, in essence, passive receptacles being conditioned to adapt and exist within an oppressive framework. The counterpoint, or the contrary tact, which is to what Freire is exhorting us, is a liberal or humanitarian or emancipatory approach to education, in which no longer does the teacher have a privilege as a subject, the student the disadvantage of being an object, but the subjectivity of all involved is recognized and then mediated, to put it in a kind of technical way, by the world itself. What do I mean there? What I mean is that instead of having teachers and students, then you have teacher-students and student-teachers. And all the individuals involved are engaging the world in a fashion which enlivens them to their consciousness and their ability to relate and to transform reality. So if a topic is at hand, whether that be something like the wage system or agricultural practices or the Pythagorean theorem, instead of a scenario where one person sort of just transmits what is the case, everybody involved contemplates and discusses what is the case, which means that their own mind enters into a relationship with the topic which is dynamic and potentially transformative. And this illumines not simply one's capacity to interact with the world considered as an object, which would be another way in which to reproduce the problem, but also it illumines the fact that learning and communication are inexorably social, and in parallel with that sociality, we are all fundamentally equal. We all, as conscious entities, if you like, have a capacity to enter into the world as a sort of open horizon, which can then orient or direct how we unfold and how the world responds to us. And it's not all seamless. There's tension, but it's an active and ultimately productive tension, which frees one from the tyrannies of ideology, of hierarchy, iniquity, and so forth, and which allows real love to become the basis of how we interact with each other. It also sort of redeems or transforms the teacher-student relationship into one which I think in other parts of the world and in other points of our history was framed in a far healthier fashion. And then it becomes a partnership rather than something which really sort of resembles a situation of dominance or assertion. You know, that's the way to go as far as I'm concerned, the way Freire is presenting it, you know, to us, that we enter into communication with each other in a radically open and humble way. But when that happens, and this is what it becomes simply untenable to persist in structures of domination. And for that very reason, you have very quickly when you start formulating educational projects in this libertarian, humanitarian, as he sometimes puts it, problem-solving fashion, or as I like to put it, you know, a situation-posing fashion. As soon as you start talking in those terms, people who are invested in the established structures of education and power are going to bridle almost instinctively, as he puts it at one point, because they see that there's an incommensurability between the culture, which is intrinsic to this alternative approach to pedagogy, and the manner in which they wish to carry it out. The manner in which, to recall Foucault, allows for the production or reproduction of a merely disciplinarian society. And hence is the sort of the broad overview of what Freire sets out in the second chapter. Eminently satisfying portion of an altogether great text. So I'll go ahead and leave it there. I just wanted to give you guys that summary and obviously endorsement of what Freire is articulating there. I think it's relatively patent or clear what relevance the suggestions of that second chapter have to our current educational system, insofar as by we here in America, but also has broader global and cultural significance. So we'll leave it there, and I hope you guys are doing all right, and I'll catch you hopefully soon with the third chapter. Ciao.